Hello, wonderful viewers. This is Jacob here with another intriguing story about love, life, and unforgettable moments with your mother-in-law. If you like stories that delve deep into family dynamics and romance, you've come to the right place. Don't forget to give it a like and leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you think. My wife and I had been renovating our house for a long time, and we're nearing the end. All that was left to do was paint, which of course brought the choking smell of solvent into the house. To avoid the fumes, we decided to spend the night at my wife's parents' house, as they lived only 5 minutes away. My relationship with her family had always been a bit strained, especially with my stepfather, who was prone to drinking a lot and being delusional. My mother-in-law had no children with him, which was always a sore subject, and their marriage seemed to lack harmony. My wife, Emily, was at work that day, leaving me to finish the renovations. After finishing everything, I left the windows open to air the place out and headed over to my in-laws' house. We had planned for Emily to join us by 6 o'clock that evening, but I didn't want to listen to my mother-in-law's lectures alone. When I arrived at the apartment, my mother-in-law, Nancy, was in the kitchen sharing a bottle of wine with Linda, her fifth-floor neighbor. It was obvious they had been drinking for quite some time. Linda soon excused herself, saying she had to go home to meet her husband after work, and it was just Nancy and me in the apartment. Her husband, George, was away on business in another city and wouldn't be back until a day later. "Why don't we have a drink together while Emily is still at work?" Nancy said, pulling another bottle of wine out of the refrigerator. After all the stress of the renovation, it seemed like a good idea, and I agreed. We had a couple glasses each, and Nancy didn't immediately get weird. She was oblivious to her appearance, sitting comfortably at the table, her hair a little disheveled and her blouse slightly unbuttoned. Nancy and Emily were similar in build, slender, with a natural elegance, although Nancy was 43 years old and Emily was 21. Watching her, I couldn't help but notice how attractive Nancy was, a thought that hadn't occurred to me before. My gaze lingered on her, and before I realized it, I said, "Aunt Nancy, you're still a very beautiful woman." She froze, stunned and not knowing what to say. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the fatigue from the renovation, but I leaned over and kissed her cheek. She didn't pull away, and suddenly everything started happening at the same time. We lost ourselves in the moment. About an hour later, the intercom buzzed, startling Nancy. She looked at me in panic, but I tried to calm her down. "Go ahead and answer it," I said. "I'll clean up the place." She quickly went to the intercom, and I cleaned up the living room so there was no trace of what had just happened. Emily was already on her way up in the elevator, and I finished just in time. When she walked in, Nancy was already back in the kitchen cutting salad, and I pretended to be lounging on the balcony. "How did it go without me?" Emily asked, clearly tired. "I'm tired," she replied. "I'm going to take a quick shower." I joined Nancy in the kitchen while Emily went to the bathroom. Nancy tried to act like nothing was wrong, but I couldn't help myself and winked at her. She blushed and quickly looked away. When Emily came out of the bathroom, we all sat down to dinner, had a couple more drinks, and then went to bed. The next morning, Emily and I headed home. About a week later, Emily said to me, "My mom asked that you help her hang the shelf." She said it was too heavy for her to handle by herself. I, of course, had no choice, so I agreed to go and help. When I arrived, Nancy had more than just the shelf to hang. One thing led to another, and soon we were repeating what had happened that first evening. It became a regular occurrence every time I helped Nancy with something. It ended the same way. After those first meetings, Nancy's attitude toward me changed. She often called me for little things that I knew she could handle on her own. Whether it was fixing a loose hinge, changing a light bulb, or helping me move furniture, she would find any excuse to invite me over. I too began to look forward to these moments, furtively casting glances, smiling secretly, and feeling the adrenaline rush associated with taking risks. We both knew it was wrong, but that only made it more interesting. One afternoon, Emily was out of town for a work conference, and Nancy invited me over again. This time she wasn't being sly. She met me at the door in a sundress, with fresh hair and the scent of perfume filling the hallway. But she didn't waste time pretending. She led me straight into the living room, where there was a shelf on the floor that she wanted me to help her put together. But we both knew the shelf wasn't the real reason for my visit. As soon as I went inside, she closed the door and we got down to it again, even more passionately than before. This time we didn't even pretend to clean up. We just lay on the floor, catching our breath and enjoying the silence that enveloped us. As time went on, guilt began to gnaw at me. Emily was wonderful. She trusted both me and her mother unconditionally. Sometimes she would mention how grateful she was that I was helping her mom, how happy she was that Nancy smiled more often. I wanted to stop, to tell Nancy that it had to end. But every time I tried to do that, I gave in to her again. She had a way of looking at me that made me feel desirable, and it was intoxicating. I couldn't resist her, and she knew it. One evening when Emily was late at work, Nancy called me over to help with the leaky faucet. When I arrived, she was in the kitchen pretending to struggle with tools. I walked up behind her, put my hands on her waist, and she snuggled up to me, her body soft and warm. We stayed like that for a moment, the tension between us palpable. I wanted to tell her that this was the last time, but instead I kissed her neck and we ended up in her bedroom. This time was different. There was a sense of desperation, like we both knew we were pushing our luck. The next day, Emily said that her mom seemed happier lately, that George had even noticed the change. She laughed, saying it was probably because Nancy was finally getting the help she needed around the house. I forced myself to smile, realizing the gravity of what I was doing. Nancy and I had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. It was as if we were caught in a web of our own making, and each secret rendezvous taught in a web of our own making, and each secret rendezvous tangled us more and more until we could no longer see a way out. 9 months later, a couple days apart, Emily and Nancy gave birth to boys. The babies were remarkably similar to each other, making George proud of his new heir. Everyone was happy, and no one suspected anything except Nancy and me. We knew the truth, and that secret bonded us in a way that neither of us could ever explain. Every time we looked at each other, there was a silent recognition between us, a bond beyond mere words. It was a shared burden, a reminder of our actions and their consequences. Though we never spoke of it, the bond between us grew stronger, not from love, but from the weight of what we knew and the unspoken promise to keep our secret.